Hello and welcome to Classic Country Backstories. I'm Colleen Gallagher. Nashville in 1973 was a much different place than it is today. Although the Nashville metro area reported a population of approximately 470,000 people, it felt much smaller. As a result, country music stars that reigned at the time lived much different than they do today. Music lovers could come to Nashville to see their favorite stars on the Grand Ole Opry on Friday or Saturday nights. If you were lucky, you may be able to walk out the front door of the Ryman and head over to Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, where you might spot some of those stars having a drink and winding down from the evening's performance. Country entertainers were more visible and were much more approachable to their fans. Up to this point, lifestyles of the rich and famous meant having a nice ranch-style house without all the security and tall fences keeping fans back as you see with today's stars. It was a much simpler time, and many artists saw no reason to fear the people who loved their country music. However, that all changed on a cold November night in 1973, when tragedy struck the country music community, affecting everyone that lived in the Nashville area. Even if you weren't a country music listener, you learned quickly of the man known simply as Stringbean. As with all the artists I cover, I believe it's important for you to know as much as I can give you about their life and career. Legends should not be defined by the way they die, but by their musical accomplishments. With that being said, it's also important to point out that the death of David Stringbean Akeman changed Nashville overnight. In Part 1, you will get to know about Stringbean and take a walk through history to learn how he came to be famous for his claw-hammer banjo-style playing and comedy songs. Episode 2 focuses on what happened on Saturday, November 10th, 1973, and the aftermath of the tragic event. So come join me on this journey through the life, career, and senseless death of David Stringbean Akeman.
Nashville, Tennessee, country music capital of the world, home of the Grand Ole Opry, where singers and dreamers come seeking stardom. Join me as we learn about the lives and careers of those who built this town on Classic Country Backstories.
Born David Akeman, June 17, 1915, in Jackson County, Kentucky. He was the son of James and Alice Johnston Akeman. Research wasn't clear on how many siblings he had, but it appears there were at least 9 others. He enjoyed his life growing up on the family farm while fishing and hunting ginseng and small wildlife. He attended school and did chores at home, although he was thought to be a little lazy. David's father was a banjo player and passed his love for it to David. The banjo was a centerpiece of Appalachian culture. He grew up watching his father play the old songs. Then he picked up some newer tunes. He later said his father taught him what little he knew. He learned the 2-finger claw hammer style of picking probably from his father and other local players. His brother Robert told that David would get a shoebox and some of his mother's sewing thread and make an instrument out of it. He would thump around on it and say, "Boy, you'll hear me over the radio waves one of these days." The family knew he was talking about the Grand Ole Opry. George D. Hay broadcast the first WSM barn dance on November 28, 1925, when David was 10 years old. 2 years later, the barn dance became the Grand Ole Opry. The Opry airwaves reached through Appalachia, where David listened in. The Akemans didn't own a radio, so he walked 3 to 4 miles up the road to a little store in Welchburg. David waited to hear his idol, Uncle Dave Macon. Young David used his imagination to visualize Macon's antics as he played. In July of 1927, David's older brother Luther died from typhoid fever. 12-year-old David was forced to bury his pain and pick up the slack on the farm in Luther's absence. Then came the stock market crash on October 29, 1929. The Great Depression had begun. David eventually quit school and hunted blackbirds with sticks or slingshots to provide food for the family. It was probably during this period of time when he began to not trust the banking system. He learned to be frugal to prevent further disaster. In 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt began a food distribution program, which was helpful to many families, including David's. Then Roosevelt opened work camps through the Civilian Conservation Corps. The camps were for rural men struggling to make ends meet. This was a much-needed and appreciated opportunity. Akeman entered the work camp sometime around 1934. The pay was $30 a month with an allotment of $22 to $25 to be sent to his family. During this period, he continued to hone his banjo skills. He played local dances. Although he didn't sing much at the time, he was learning lyrics to use later as his skills on the banjo improved. Sometime in 1935, David left home and headed to Lexington. He went to radio station WLAP to see Asa Martin, a star on a station who had previously met him at a talent contest. Martin invited him to play a number, and he chose John Henry. Years later, Asa admitted that he couldn't recall his name, so he said, "Now listen, folks, I can't think of his name, but for present, I'm going to call him Stringbeans." Country historian Charles Wolfe claimed that Stringbean didn't change his name to the singular form until several years later. However, Stringbean often repeated the story that simply said, "Come here, Stringbean, and play us a tune." He didn't like the name at first, but it stuck, providing a catchy name that gave him an identity. David continued on radio and began working for traveling medicine shows, movie theaters in Appalachia, as well as rural schools, courthouses, and churches. Akeman also loved baseball and even claimed he played in a Class D Mountain State League. Stringbean originally only played banjo but branched out to comedic songs upon the suggestion of Asa Martin, as his ability to make others laugh registered to Martin. He was not the first person to do this, but he heard others on the Opry, hearing performers tell wild stories about country characters. Money was scarce on the road, but David knew how to survive. He once said, "I could eat breakfast for 9 cents, bacon, egg, toast, jelly, and coffee." And he also said, "You'd be surprised how many ways beans can be fixed, and we ate them for every meal." There were no records to specify when David Akeman met Blanche McQueen, but she would become his first wife. It's also not known when they were married. We do know that they were married by 1940. The 1940 census shows that he was living in the Dan McQueen household, which was Blanche's father. According to her family members, David seemed nice and their relationship was good. The same year, Stringbean went to work for Charlie Monroe, brother of Bill Monroe. A year later, he left and began billing himself as Stringbean, the Kentucky Wonder. He continued on WLAP radio. In late July 1942, he went to work for Bill Monroe. Monroe said, "He was the first banjo player I ever had, and he was a good singer, and he could do some comedy, too. I just wanted a fellow who could sing and not play too much banjo, just fill in with it." From the moment he joined Bill Monroe's Bluegrass Boys, he knew his dream was becoming a reality. His first appearance on the Grand Ole Opry was at the War Memorial Auditorium. We can only imagine what Stringbean felt during the first performance. He shared the stage with bashful brother Oswald, Minnie Pearl, and his idol, Uncle Dave Macon. Shortly after joining the Bluegrass Boys and the Opry, he went to work designing a famous costume Stringbean was known for. He began drawing on his eyebrows upward, like that of a sad clown. He wore a long nightshirt and jeans buckled just above his knees. He also donned a small brimmed hat. Some of Stringbean's physical characteristics were borrowed from a comedian named Slim Miller after he retired. During 1943, Stringbean bought a banjo that he would play for the rest of his life. It was a Vega No. 9 tubaphone, serial number 81268. String bought it secondhand, understanding that it had been manufactured around 1930. In 1943, the Grand Ole Opry moved to the Ryman Auditorium, originally built as a church in 1892 by Captain Thomas Ryman. That same year, David Akeman was drafted into the U.S. Army. Enlistment showed the date to be June 30th at Camp Oglethorpe, Georgia. His occupation was listed as actors and actresses. By November, he was in Camp Fannin, Texas. David suffered from extreme anxiety and was hospitalized for a period before receiving a discharge. David kept the circumstances around his discharge quiet, but once claimed to a reporter that a back injury caused his discharge. Akeman returned to Bill Monroe and the Grand Ole Opry in 1944. Monroe formed a baseball team as part of his traveling tent show. String was a strong player, known as one of the best on the field. He also had the opportunity to travel, work, and room with his hero, Uncle Dave Macon. He would spend every spare moment with Macon, learning how to be a professional. According to Stringbean, they toured together for 2 or 3 years. The road and the Opry were taking a toll on Stringbean's marriage to Blanche. She moved to Nashville with him, but could not travel as she had an ailing mother to take care of. When she asked him if he had to go to the Opry every weekend, he told her, "Blanche, honey, I wouldn't quit the Grand Ole Opry to go to heaven." I couldn't find documentation to tell us when Blanche and Stringbean split, but it appears to be sometime in 1944. During the summer of 1945, Lester Flatt joined the Bluegrass Boys. Shortly thereafter, Stringbean left, and his replacement was none other than Earl Scruggs. String went on tour with Lou Childer for a time, and the two became close friends. It's also not clear when David met Bourbon Estelle Stanfill. Joe Denton later reported he saw David making eyes at Estelle from the stage of a Bill Monroe show at a schoolhouse in Williamson County in the summer of 1945. Estelle was born in 1914 in Fly, Tennessee, 45 miles south of Nashville. She too had been married and divorced. They were married on December the 14th, 1945 in Williamson County. Stringbean's marriage to Estelle was completely different from the relationship he had with Blanche. She traveled everywhere with him. They shared a love for fishing and hunting. It's been reported that she was better at it than he was. They loved the simple life and dreamed of having a farm. They appeared to be best friends. On March 16, 1946, Grandpa Jones made his first appearance on the Grand Ole Opry. He met David around this time, and they became fast friends. Their friendship first began over hunting and fishing. Grandpa said, "String never liked to get up at 4 in the morning to go fish. He said if he had to work at it, he'd just stay home." For a time, David and Estelle made their home in Apartment C at 407 Fatherland Street while dreaming of having a home in the country like Grandpa and Ramona had in Virginia. Stringbean then published a book called Stringbean, The Kentucky Wonder Songs, Jokes, and Picture Book. It included his versions of songs like John Henry, Cross-Eyed Nancy, Jane, Pretty Polly, and many others. The book also included a biographical sketch, pictures, and jokes. He also included an early version of his famous Letters from Home that became so popular on Hee Haw years later. Stringbean's idol, Uncle Dave Macon, died on March 22, 1952. Macon left String one of his custom-made banjos. Grandpa and Ramona decided to move back to Nashville. David and Estelle had been eyeing up a 143-acre farm in the Ridgetop area with 2 houses on it. The price tag was $10,000. He couldn't afford it, and neither could Grandpa, so String suggested they go in together and buy it. Later, Grandpa said, "We did, and those were some of the best years of my life." David and Estelle decided to live in the smaller house, a little red cabin. It had no indoor toilet. The Akemans had an outhouse they used. Grandpa and Ramona had children, so they took the larger house. The houses were right next to each other. When the families weren't on the road, Stringbean and Estelle spent time with Grandpa, Ramona, and the Jones children. They gardened, picked blackberries, fished, and hunted together. Estelle did all the driving. Grandpa said he'd never known Stringbean to drive a car. She also helped him with his grooming. He used rubbing alcohol as deodorant, and she shaved him with apple cider vinegar. He said anything else would make him break out. Kurt Gibson, who later played for String, said that String told him he never had to leave home without her and wanted her company all the time. Most of his friends called him by his stage name, but she always called him David. In 1952, Stringbean went to work for the Tommy Scott Hillbilly Jamboree and Circus Review. To take this job, he had to leave the Opry, which must have been a major decision for him. They traveled over 350 towns a year. As part of the deal, he didn't get paid a flat fee, but they gave him 50% of the ticket sales, and he could sell whatever merchandise he had. The first thing David and Estelle did was buy a brand new Cadillac. That started a tradition for the Akemans that would continue for the rest of their lives. Even though they lived a very frugal life, they would trade their car and buy a new Cadillac every year, paying cash. They kept a less expensive car for daily use at home and used the Caddy as a business vehicle so they could claim it on their taxes. Stringbean worked the traveling show until 1956 when rock and roll began to hurt the country market. Stringbean had to get back on the Opry. Opry manager Jim Denny didn't want him back, but Roy Acuff intervened, and he was reinstated. He performed on the Opry as well as Red Foley's Ozark Jubilee and worked road shows as he could find them. The Akemans continued their frugal lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and growing their food. He cut his own wood. He also found a way to save money on clothing. He would bring squirrels he had killed to country star George Morgan, and Morgan would trade them suits he didn't wear for the squirrels. He had a long-standing goal to have $1 million. Once he told Tommy Scott, "Me and my 5 are going to make $1 million." Grandpa Jones decided to move his family to Washington, D.C. to join a show called The Morning Show with an upcoming artist, Jimmy Dean. Jones sold his half of the farm to Akemans. Stringbean told Grandpa, "You'll be back in a year." 1958 brought the beginning of popularity of folk music with the Kingston Trio. Eventually, Stringbean became a loved figure at college campus shows. He continued to record and perform. A short time later, Grandpa Jones and his family came back to Ridgetop. They settled in to a 90-acre farm just a half mile from the Akemans. While Grandpa was gone, David found another profitable avenue, hunting ginseng and selling it. The two men spent lots of time walking through the woods and finding it. Opry musician Joe Edwards said the plant would sell for about $60 a pound at the time. It's not really known when Stringbean began packing around a wad of cash. There are reports that he didn't trust banks. Rumors began to spread that David and Estelle had made quite a fortune, living as lean as they did, and they kept it hidden in their home in Ridgetop. Opry star Gene Shepard warned him about packing so much money around. A couple months later, he told Shepard that he had opened a couple bank accounts. They had a bank account at the Bank of Goodlettsville, and they put cash in bank strong boxes. However, they would continue to carry large amounts of cash. String would sometimes flash a wad of cash to his friends. The Akemans were kind people and befriended other entertainers who were up and coming in the music business, like Loretta Lynn and her husband Mooney. He also became close friends with Porter Wagoner. Porter had String on his television show beginning with his second episode. Porter had a great affection for him, and it was apparent when he appeared on the Porter Wagoner show. He was also a frequent guest on the Wilburn Brothers show. Throughout the 1960s, Stringbean was busy recording for Star Day Records, making television appearances and working shows. Little Jimmy Dickens once said, "I had the rhinestone suits, the nudie rhinestone clothes." And String says, "Ever get tired of some of those old pants? I'd like to have a pair with rhinestones on it." And the next week, I brought him a pair. I brought him a pair with rhinestones all over them. And he had it fixed with the shirt on it with his costume. And he wore those little rhinestone pants there for 2 or 3 years. At one point, some guys at the Opry were complaining about the low pay for performing there. Someone saw Stringbean putting his banjo in the trunk of the Cadillac. A couple guys stopped him and said, "String, hold it. Let's go to the bosses at WSM and talk to them about raising our salary or we're going to quit. What do you think, String?" To which he said, "Boys, when I came here, I was a-walking." Then he climbed into the front passenger seat of the Cadillac, and Estelle drove off. In 1969, Canadian television producers John Aylesworth and Frank Peppiatt decided to create a rural version laugh-in-style comedy and music show in the U.S. On the show would be new young comics like Junior Samples and Lulu Roman. Veteran stars on the show were Archie Campbell, Grandpa Jones, and Minnie Pearl. They paired up Buck Owens and Roy Clark to host the show. It made perfect sense to add Stringbean to the lineup. The beginning skit shows String dressed up like a scarecrow with a crow puppet on his shoulder. One of the skits that solidified his status on Hee Haw was his infamous Letters from Home. Producer John Aylesworth said the skits were like manna from heaven. Stringbean and Estelle were living their best lives. They bought an additional cabin at Center Hill Lake. Then they bought a 16-foot Sea Devil bass boat with a 65-horsepower Mercury motor for fishing on the lake. When he wasn't fishing or filming Hee Haw, he continued to stay busy with live shows and appearing on the Opry. When Opryland opened its doors in May of 1972, Stringbean was there as well. He enjoyed playing the Opryland stage in the Grand Ole Opry because fans could come up close to the stage and take pictures. He liked the crowds and he liked to be close to them when he was performing. During the holidays, Hee Haw cast members would congregate at Grandpa's or Stringbean's houses, where Ramona and Estelle would cook for them. Cast members would bring dishes from Kroger, since many of them were not living in Tennessee and stayed in hotels while in town. They would sing, play, and laugh for hours. Friends Grandpa Jones, Archie Campbell, and Ronnie Stoneman were concerned about the cash the Akemans kept with them. Stringbean carried a gun and thought they were safe. One day, he told his old friend Tommy Scott that he finally made his $1 million goal. In early 1973, Kurt Gibson went to work playing guitar for Stringbean. String tried to convince Kurt to move his family into the empty house next to him. He bragged that the home in the country was much safer than the current house they lived in on Dickerson Road. Estelle told Kurt's wife, "I think I could leave a bucket of money on the front porch and come back at the end of the summer tour and it'd still be there." The family declined the offer because they wanted to remain in Goodlettsville. Stringbean, along with Kurt Gibson, spent the summer playing at college campuses. One night, after a successful show, String told Kurt, "He who plays the five rules the world." That's it for this episode of Classic Country Backstories. Make sure to stay tuned for part 2 of Stringbean. Until next time, take care, God bless, and I'll see you later.